The importance of size just cannot be understated in sports. They told Muggsy Bogues he was too short for the NBA, and even the great Lionel Messi had to undergo growth hormone therapy before he even hit puberty. But fighting is a different game entirely, and its athletes come in all shapes and sizes. And as mixed martial arts evolves, you're beginning to see some truly unique fighters carving out success in the sport. Guys like Chase Hooper get their paychecks from the same company that employs the terrifying Alex Pereira. And whether they're skinny as a rake or big-bellied enough to be considered obese by most nutritionists, MMA is a sport full of unconventional fighters. So let's take a dive in and get to know some of our favorites. You guys surely know about boxing's iconic big-boned brawler Butterbean, real name Eric Esch. Well, in the UFC, the heavyweight limit is set at 265 pounds, and despite older names like Giant Silva and Emmanuel Yarbo no longer competing, modern fans still have the Black Beast, Derek Lewis. It's not just his physical frame that makes him unconventional, though. Lewis is a big hitter, and he doesn't need much of an opening to find his mark. But he's also known for throwing bizarre flying kicks, and for his uncanny ability to just ignore grappling entirely and simply stand up whenever he's tired of rolling around on the floor. He's definitely pushing the limits of the 265-pound weight cap, but he hits his mark, and when those cage doors close, he breaks the logic of combat constantly. Lewis is not going to give up on his love of food just because he has a fight coming up, and he's not the only one.
He disrespected Popeye's chicken on a commercial for years.
If you're already loving this, smash that like button. It helps us reach more MMA fans just like you. Some guys aren't truly reaching their athletic potential because of mismanaging their weight, and our favorite example is the self-described kung fu fighter Chris Barnett, the guy who would probably be a middleweight if he took his dieting seriously. One look at the guy who used to have the nickname Huggy Bear should be enough to tell you that he certainly doesn't seem like the fighting type. And even if you were convinced that he was a fighter, you'd be more inclined to think he was the rough and rowdy brawling type. But that's where you'd be wrong. No, Chris Barnett is one of the most athletically wild strikers in the heavyweight division. A Taekwondo fighter throwing spinning kicks and flying attacks like a man half his size. Just look at what he did to Jean Vellante. That was a knockout for the ages. We're still surprised that Barnett was flexible enough to get his leg up that far in the first place.
And then he lets Jean Vellante back in. Covering. Oh my goodness! Oh my God! Oh man! Chris Barnett!
He, of course, follows in the footsteps of iconic big-bellied heavyweights like Super Samoan Mark Hunt, a ferocious former kickboxer turned MMA fan favorite who was known for his uncanny ability to score walk-off KOs. And trust me, the craziest fighter story is still coming. You're not ready for what's next. Sure, the less we say about Hunt's ground game, the better. But speaking of surprises, you won't believe what this next guy brought to the cage. Nothing about Roy Nelson's appearance screamed black belt, but don't let looks fool you. Behind the big belly and wild hair, Nelson was way more than a brawler.
Go Croca! It is all over! The beats Mirko Croca!
Sure, he had that thunderous KO power. In fact, he remains one of the biggest punchers the sport has ever known. But he also had real grappling chops, using his BJJ skills to dominate on The Ultimate Fighter and beyond. Could you imagine a middleweight division with a lean Roy Nelson, Derek Lewis, or Mark Hunt competing in there? Or how about Daniel Cormier? He looks more like your dad's best friend than a fearsome fighter, but when DC gets locked in, he is a truly terrifying sight.
Warning from the referee, Kevin McDonald, for Oostamir to get out of there.
But he can't. I mean, he's really
And
helpless.
that is it. Daniel Cormier defends in style.
You don't look at him and think Olympic athlete, but the dude's an easy top 10 fighter of all time. However, his AKA teammate Darren Wynn is an even bigger outlier. Middleweights come in all shapes and sizes, with some famously tall and rangy fighters like the 6'4" Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira, guys who really tested their opponent's distance control in every fight. Darren Wynn is just 5'6", shorter than flyweight champ Brandon Moreno, and somehow still made it to the UFC's middleweight division. The guy is clearly a physical specimen and an absolute tank, but he definitely struggled to navigate the distance between him and his targets. But sometimes even having the physical attributes alone isn't enough. Not everyone can be a Stefan Struve, a towering figure who measured in a staggering 7 foot tall. But hey, I guess most people aren't blessed with those kind of genetics, and it's not like Struve was ever good at using his height. They called him Skyscraper, but he never learned how to use his range, and it cost him. If you're gonna come into this sport as a tall guy, you'd better learn how to use it. Maximizing your own physical potential is such an underrated part of the fight game, and very few fighters have truly mastered their own development quite like Jared Cannonier, a former heavyweight who eventually went all the way down to the middleweight division, fighting for a belt upon reaching his peak condition. He was never truly elite at his heaviest, but became a legitimate top 5 talent for a long time and never lost his immense strength and physicality for the division. And the opposite could be said for the late, great Anthony "Rumble" Johnson, who was one of the biggest welterweights to ever compete in mixed martial arts, before his undisciplined weight cutting eventually saw him move up to middleweight, then to light heavyweight, before he eventually even tested the waters at heavyweight.
Oh, he's out.
He's gonna finish it right here. It is all over. Anthony "Rumble" Johnson.
He had a level of power that was as potent at 170 pounds as it was against the biggest men in the sport. That's why they called him Rumble, folks. Weight cuts in MMA are far more extreme than they are in boxing. Fighters will go to crazy lengths in order to gain every possible advantage over their opponents. Look at a guy like Michel Pereira. He looked like a huge middleweight, but somehow made the 170 limit. While we're on the subject of weight, how about the early UFC career of Paddy Pimblett? Because for as much as he's taking things a lot more seriously now, Pimblett used to pack on some serious bulk in between fights, gaining a whole bunch of weight before, then getting absolutely shredded during fight camps. Like Derek Lewis, Paddy the Baddy is a pretty big fan of food, and until he reached the lightweight top 15, he made no effort to hide the fact that he was as undisciplined as they come when he wasn't actively training. But eventually, he needed to dial it in and take his weight seriously. And let's be real, the results have been pretty good ever since. Sean Woodson is a guy who makes the cut for a few different reasons. Firstly, he's a 6'2" featherweight, which is just about as tall as any fighter in that division could ever possibly be. Strangely enough, Sean Woodson started out as a 215-pound heavyweight boxer, but over time, he cut down through middleweight, welterweight, lightweight, and somehow made it all the way to the 145-pound featherweight division. That's the same division that brought us guys as short as the 2-time title challenger Frankie Edgar, who, by the way, was a natural bantamweight, who somehow won UFC gold at lightweight, despite being a pretty lean 5'6". How did he do it? Frankie had sick boxing fundamentals, good speed, excellent wrestling, great footwork, and the most unbreakable spirit imaginable. Height is clearly not essential when it comes to having huge success. 2-time UFC champion Alexander Volkanovski might actually be the greatest featherweight of all time, and he's currently the shortest 145-pound fighter on the roster. Perhaps there is something to be said for being compact, but there are examples on both extreme ends of the spectrum. Semi Schilt was an excellent fighter in both kickboxing and mixed martial arts, towering above his competition at 6'11", using that reach to gain every possible advantage over his opponents. In the modern day, how about the ridiculous length and reach of John Jones, whose 84.5-inch wingspan makes navigating his fighting distance on the feet damn near impossible for most opponents. On the other side of things, take a heavyweight like the legendary Igor Vovchanchin, the Pride icon who stood at a mere 5'8", but still managed to KO the 6'8" Paul Varelans. Vovchanchyn basically navigated an entire foot of distance to knock out the fighter known as the Polar Bear, and he did it with a 68-inch reach. That's the same arm length that bantamweight legend Dominic Cruz has. But sometimes, the challenges that a fighter faces comes down to far more than just height or reach. Take Nick Newell, a man who was born with a congenital amputation of his left arm, meaning he only had one working limb. But somehow he still rose to the elite levels of the World Series of Fighting organization, winning 11 fights in a row to eventually earn a title shot against a champion, Justin Gaethje. Of course, Gaethje was headed to a different level, and he did end up putting a beating on Newell, TKOing him in the second round. He did come close to signing for the UFC, but lost his Contender Series fight and was judged by Dana White to simply not be good enough. Newell ended his career with a very impressive record of 16 wins, 13 by way of finish, and just 4 losses. The only time he ever got finished was by the living legend Gaethje. Win, lose, or draw, the idea of a one-armed athlete being a successful cage fighter is pretty far-fetched. But the story of Zion Clark takes things to a totally different level. The idea of never giving up on your dreams is something people say without really understanding it. Zion Clark was born without legs, but he refused to let that define him. He struggled through his first 2 seasons as a college wrestler, but turned it around in his junior and senior years, racking up 33 wins. Then, in 2022, he made his pro MMA debut and won by unanimous decision. They call him the fastest man in the world on 2 hands, and when it comes to unconventional fighters, Zion stands as the gold standard for adapting, surviving, and thriving against all odds. It's clear that all commonly held notions of what a fighter is and can be are fading away by the year, making for a more diverse and ultimately interesting product. Well, what about you guys? Which fighter truly shocked you when you actually saw them compete, when you expected one thing and got something totally different? Whether it's in MMA or anywhere else, let us know in the comments below. We're always reading them. And hey, if you liked this video, we think you'll love the one that's showing on your screen right now. Go ahead and click it. You're not going to want to miss it.